I am still that little kid that grew up in Liverpool. Okay, I got really famous, but in here, I'm still that little kid. So I'm amazed at like the audience reaction and stuff, and because it's like...
Picture this. Paul McCartney awake long after midnight, the house quiet in a way that feels unfamiliar, not empty, reflective, the kind of silence that makes memories louder. The walls don't celebrate him, they remind him. For a moment it feels like he's about to name just one band, one name history somehow misplaced. But that thought doesn't last. Because the truth, as Paul sees it, is more uncomfortable. It wasn't one, it was five. 5 bands that never got what they deserved, not because they failed, but because the world wasn't listening closely enough. And the first name comes with a quiet ache. Badfinger. This one still hurts, more than most, because the wound never really closed. Badfinger had the melodies, they had the feeling, they had that rare emotional honesty Paul recognized instantly, the kind that sounds simple on the surface, but carries something fragile and exposed underneath. Songs that didn't shout their brilliance, but trusted you to feel it. They should have been giants, not someday, but immediately. Paul saw himself in them, the gift for melody, the instinct for tenderness, the belief that good songs would be enough, and that recognition makes what happened next even harder to sit with. Instead of rising, they were slowly pulled apart, swallowed by mismanagement, betrayal, and promises that turned poisonous. Contracts became traps, meetings replaced music. Paul watched their talent drain away behind courtrooms and legal language, helpless as momentum turned into despair. What should have been a bright, joyful future collapsed into something darker, quieter, and irreversible. This wasn't failure, it was theft. They weren't underrated because they lacked greatness. They were underrated because they trusted the wrong people and paid for that trust with everything. That knowledge lingers uncomfortably because it raises a question Paul can never quite escape. How many other great bands were lost not to lack of talent, but to a world that knows exactly how to exploit innocence? That thought alone pulls Paul's mind toward a band that suffered in a different, quieter way. Ray Davies turned his eye inward, writing about streets, families, neighbors, boredom, pride, and quiet frustration. Songs that didn't beg for attention, but revealed themselves slowly, like conversations overheard through thin walls.
No, that's how people start. You start out, you love what you do, but you're trying to pay the bills. But the fact that these songs then get into people's heads and they have this meaning, I mean, that's the biggest bonus.
Paul admired that deeply. There was courage in it. But he also saw the cost, and it was brutal. Band tours in America, momentum strangled just as it began to build. Albums filled with insight and invention reduced to cult treasures instead of cultural turning points. What made it sting even more was how close they were. So many songs that could have shifted the entire shape of pop music, if only the timing had been kinder, if only the industry had been more patient, if only subtlety had been valued as much as spectacle. They didn't lose relevance, they were denied it. And that denial lingered like a quiet injustice. Because while louder bands were rewarded for shouting, the Kinks were punished for noticing, for telling small truths in a world obsessed with big gestures. From there, his thoughts drift toward a band that lived in constant transition. Steve Winwood chased feeling instead of formulas, intuition instead of certainty. Paul felt a deep respect for that choice, but also a quiet sadness, because he knew exactly how the industry reacts to artists who won't settle. The world prefers boxes, clear lanes, easy stories. Traffic refused all of it. And because they did, their brilliance was scattered instead of concentrated, admired instead of crowned. Where other bands simplified to survive, traffic complicated themselves. They grew inward instead of outward. Their music asked questions instead of offering answers, moods instead of anthems. That made them harder to sell and easier to overlook. They weren't inconsistent, they were searching. And that search came at a cost. Momentum slipped away, attention wandered. While others learned how to stay visible, traffic kept moving forward even if fewer people followed. Paul understood that pain all too well. Because sometimes the most honest music isn't the kind that wins, it's the kind that refuses to stop evolving. Then comes a name that always felt just a little misunderstood. The Zombies. The Zombies created beauty without urgency. Subtle harmonies, melancholy melodies, songs that unfolded slowly, asking the listener to lean in instead of shouting for attention. Paul always felt a quiet kinship with that approach, because music like this doesn't compete, it waits, it trusts the listener, and Paul knew those kinds of songs rarely win races. They don't dominate charts or explode on first contact. They age quietly, they slip into lives slowly, then stay there longer than expected. While louder bands burned fast, chasing impact and immediacy, the Zombies lingered in the background, patient and overlooked. Their records didn't demand devotion, they invited it. And invitations are easy to ignore in a world obsessed with noise. What hurt most was how often they were mistaken for something small, safe, decorative. Critics missed the tension. Beneath the softness, the emotional weight hiding behind those gentle arrangements, the Zombies weren't fragile, they were restrained. And restraint, Paul knew, is often confused with weakness. Their mistake wasn't a lack of ambition, it wasn't a lack of talent. It was gentleness. And in an era that rewarded volume and certainty, gentleness was quietly pushed aside. And finally, there's one band Paul always felt history rushed past too quickly. Rod Stewart's voice carried grit, humor, and vulnerability all at once, like someone telling the truth without worrying how it might look. Paul heard something rare there. Not ambition polished for charts, but joy played in real time. Music that didn't pose, music that didn't pretend to be more important than it was, and that, he knew, made people uncomfortable. Because faces were never taken seriously enough. They were labeled messy, temporary, transitional. Critics treated them like a phase instead of a statement. But Paul heard a band capturing a feeling most groups lose the moment success teaches them how to behave. They didn't sound unfinished. They sounded free. And that freedom cost them. Joy is easy to dismiss. Joy looks careless next to discipline. Joy doesn't age well in a world that prefers control. And joy, Paul knew, is often underestimated. When the names finally settle, Paul exhales slowly, as if setting something down he's carried for years. These bands weren't missing talent. They were missing protection, timing, patience, someone to step in before momentum turned into neglect. And that leaves a thought that still troubles him, long after the list ends. How many great bands slipped through the cracks, not because they weren't good enough, but because the world only celebrates what it can immediately understand? Some bands explode, others quietly endure, and sometimes the most underrated music is the kind that waits for you to grow into it. Paul sits with that idea for a long while, longer than he expects, neither bitter nor triumphant, just honest. The kind of honesty that comes only after decades of watching brilliance rise, fall, and sometimes disappear without ceremony. He knows now that being underrated doesn't mean being forgotten. Often it means being misunderstood at the wrong moment, being too gentle in a loud era, too thoughtful in a time that rewards immediacy, too human when the world demands spectacle. Some bands arrive before the audience knows how to listen. Some write songs that don't explode on impact, but linger quietly, waiting for years, for the right age, the right heartbreak, the right silence. And that realization softens him, because maybe the real measure of greatness isn't how loudly history applauds in the moment, but how deeply the music stays with you once the noise fades, when trends pass, when names fall away, and only the feeling remains. That is the kind of legacy Paul trusts most.